The classroom for strategic history and warfare philosophy was one of the grandest. Its tiered seats, designed to accommodate the varied anatomies of the student body, curved around a central holographic emitter floor. The far wall was a single pane of transparent diamond laminate, offering a breathtaking, silent view of a stellar nursery, a riot of nascent blues and violent pinks against the infinite black. Instructor Kalen stood beside the emitter, a solitary figure from a solitary species. Humanity was a latecomer to the compact, a source of endless rumor and disquieting whispers. They were few in number, their presence in galactic politics almost non-existent, yet they held a disproportionate number of seats in strategic and military instruction at the academy. Kalen embodied their enigma. He was of average height for his species, clad in a simple, unadorned gray uniform that absorbed the light. His face was placid, his hair dark, and his eyes, a shade of brown so deep they seemed to drink the ambient light, held a disconcerting stillness. He was lecturing on asymmetric warfare, his voice a calm, even tenor amplified just enough to be heard by all. "The foundational error in confronting an asymmetric threat," he said, his gaze sweeping across the diverse assembly, "is to apply conventional metrics of victory. Occupying territory, destroying materiel, attriting enemy forces, these are often irrelevant to an opponent whose victory condition is not conquest, but the exhaustion of your will to fight." A sharp, chitinous clack echoed from the upper tiers. It was Cadet Xylok of the Cathar Imperium. Xylok was a magnificent specimen of his race, standing nearly 3 meters tall on 4 powerful, reverse-jointed legs. His upper torso bore 4 arms, 2 of which were folded behind his back in a display of casual discipline, while the other 2 rested on the console before him. His carapace was a polished, iridescent obsidian, shot through with veins of emerald. His multifaceted eyes, 1,000 tiny lenses, glittered with an intelligence matched only by their arrogance. The Cathar were warriors, famed throughout the quadrant for their prowess in single combat, their lightning-fast skirmish fleets, and a code of honor so rigid it bordered on ritual. "Instructor." Xylok's voice was a series of resonant clicks and whistles, perfectly rendered into galactic standard by his translator. "With all due respect to your species, theoretical expertise, this line of reasoning seems predicated on a fundamental weakness, a failure to bring overwhelming force to bear decisively." Kalen turned his placid gaze upon the cadet. "Explain, Cadet Xylok. Scenarios you describe, insurgencies, wars of attrition, are the recourse of the desperate. The technologically or numerically inferior," Xylok gestured with one of his upper hands, a graceful, 4-fingered appendage. "A truly superior power, such as my own Imperium, would not allow such a conflict to fester. The initial strike would be so total, so devastating, that the enemy's capacity and will to resist would be shattered simultaneously. It is a failure of nerve, not a failure of doctrine." A low murmur went through the class. The Vorlag, a bulky, furred predator species, grunted in what might have been agreement. The Glyptons, crystalline beings of pure logic, remained impassive, their inner thoughts a mystery. Kalen offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. It did not reach his eyes. "An interesting perspective, Cadet. It reflects the Cathar's cultural emphasis on decisive, honorable combat, but it presumes your enemy shares your definition of what it means to be shattered." Xylok's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Some truths are universal, Instructor. Existence is preferable to non-existence. Victory is preferable to defeat. The tales of humanity's supposed prowess in this area are inflated. Whispers in the data streams, ghost stories told by nervous diplomats. You are a species of soft-bodied persistence predators from a high-gravity death world, yes. Formidable on a one-to-one basis, perhaps. But in the grand calculus of interstellar war, you lack the numbers, the industrial base, the sheer glorious history of conquest. Your reputation feels unearned. The challenge hung in the air, thick and palpable. The view of the nebula outside seemed to dim as every optical sensor in the room fixed on the lone human. This was the crux of it, the question that followed humanity wherever they went. They spoke softly but were rumored to carry a very, very big stick, but no one had ever seen it. Their history, prior to their peaceful entry into the compact, was a maddening black box of classified data and redacted files. Kalen's smile widened by a fraction of a millimeter. Reputation is a tool, cadet. Sometimes more effective than a fleet, but you are correct. Theory without application is sterile. You desire proof. Xylox straightened to his full, imposing height. We are cadets of war. We learn by seeing. Show us. Show us a scenario where a numerically inferior human force could defeat a superior Cathar fleet and army, commanded by myself, without resorting to the dishonorable follies you champion. A hush fell. This was unprecedented. To challenge an instructor so directly, to demand a custom simulation on the spot, was the height of hubris. But Kalen seemed unperturbed. If anything, he looked pleased. Dishonor is a luxury, cadet, Kalen said softly. But I will accept your challenge on one condition. Xylox bristled, that you see it through to the end. No matter what, Xylox scoffed, a rasping sound from his thorax. Of course. I am not a hatchling to flee from a painful lesson. Very well. Kalen turned to the central emitter. Computer, access my personal teaching directory. Authorization Kalen 734 Delta. A soft chime echoed in the room. A female synthesized voice responded. Authorization confirmed. Accessing classified teaching module, Project Chimera. Warning. This simulation contains content rated Omega level for psychological impact. It is not recommended for species with low psychic resilience or those with cultural taboos against strategic annihilation. Do you wish to proceed? The warning sent a ripple of unease through the classroom. Omega level was the highest classification, reserved for things like recordings of stellar collapse, mimetic hazards, or historical records of species that had driven themselves to extinction. Lyra, a Cygnian cadet whose species communicated through subtle psychic harmonies as much as speech, shimmered with distress. Her slender, avian-like form seemed to contract, and the low, pleasant hum that usually surrounded her became a discordant thrum of anxiety. Even Grull, the hulking Vorlag, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his large, canine teeth glinting in the low light. Xylox, however, was undeterred. Proceed, he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. As you wish, cadet, Kalen said, his eyes still holding that placid, unreadable calm. The parameters are as follows. A contested star system, Tartarus, containing one gas giant, 3 barren moons, and 1 garden world analog, designated Tartarus 3. The Cathar Imperium has established a fledgling colony and a primary military outpost on the planet. Your force consists of 1 Imperator-class battlecruiser, 6 Talon-class destroyers, and 24 fighter-interceptor wings, supported by a planetary garrison of 100,000 Cathar warriors with full armor and air support. Your objective, repel a human incursion and secure the system. The holographic emitter hummed to life. A miniature star system bloomed in the center of the room, a golden sun with its orbiting worlds. On the 3rd planet, a swirl of green and blue, a tiny icon of the Cathar Imperium pulsed with light. Xylox's multifaceted eyes drank in the strategic display. This was his element. And the human force, he asked, already formulating attack vectors. 1 carrier, the HES. Vigilance, Kalen replied. 4 escort frigates, no capital ships. Their ground contingent is 5,000 soldiers. They are outnumbered 20 to 1 on the ground and significantly outgunned in space. You have every advantage. Kalen gestured to a command interface that materialized before Xylox's seat. You have command. The simulation will run in accelerated time, but you may pause to issue orders. Begin when ready. Xylox's 4 hands danced across the controls. His arrogance was now tempered by a focused, professional zeal. This would be a masterclass, a lesson in overwhelming force he would deliver personally to this strange little human instructor. Let them see how true warriors conduct a war, he murmured, and initiated the simulation. The holographic display zoomed in on the Tartarus system. Tiny, needle-like ships representing the human fleet translated from hyperspace at the system's edge, far outside the effective range of the Cathar's main batteries. Predictable, Xylox noted, his voice crisp. They respect the reach of our battlecruiser. They will attempt to probe, to harass, standard doctrine for an inferior force. He issued a series of commands with fluid precision. Launch all fighter wings, screen the planet. Destroyers 1 through 3 advance in a forward pincer formation. Lure them into the gravity well. Once they commit, the Imperator will translate to point-blank range and annihilate them. It was a classic Cathar strategy. Aggressive, bold, designed to force a decisive engagement. On the display, the Cathar fighters, rendered as brilliant emerald streaks, swarmed out from the planet. The destroyers, sleek, predatory vessels, moved with predatory grace. The human ships responded, but not as Xyloc expected. They didn't engage. They scattered. Small, unmanned probes detached from the carrier and frigates, fanning out in complex, unpredictable vectors. The frigates themselves began burning hard, not towards the Cathar fleet, but into eccentric orbits, skimming the gas giant's radiation belts and diving through the system's asteroid-choked ecliptic plane. "They are running," one of the other Cathar cadets in the class noted with a sneer. "They are not running," Kalen corrected softly, his voice cutting through the low murmur. "They are mapping," Xyloc frowned. "Mapping what? Our positions are obvious." "Just your positions," Kalen said. "They're mapping your sensor propagation, your communication frequencies and encryption strength, your engine outputs and shield harmonics. Every packet of data your fleet emits is a brushstroke in the portrait of your capabilities." The display, the Cathar fighters, finding no primary targets, began picking off the human probes. Each time one was destroyed, however, 2 more would be launched. The human carrier, the Vigilance, remained at extreme range, a ghost on the edge of the system, refusing to be drawn in. The frigates continued their mad dance, forcing the Cathar destroyers to constantly adjust their vectors, burning precious fuel. "This is inefficient," Xyloc growled, feeling a prickle of frustration. This wasn't a battle. It was a tedious exercise in pest control. "They are wasting assets. We have destroyed 17, no, 18 of their probes. And they have now logged the exact energy signature of your point defense cannons as they fired," Kalen stated calmly. "They know the cycle rate, the targeting acquisition speed, the power draw from your ship's reactor. They didn't waste 18 probes. They spent them to purchase invaluable intelligence." The mood in the classroom was shifting. The initial confidence was being replaced by a confused tension. This was not the honorable clash of fleets they had expected. Frustrated, Xyloc decided to force the issue. He ordered his destroyers to ignore the dancing frigates and make a direct burn for the Vigilance. It was a risk, leaving the planet momentarily less defended, but the carrier was the heart of the human force. Destroy it and the rest would collapse. As the Cathar destroyers surged forward, the human frigates finally acted. They didn't attack the destroyers. Instead, they launched a volley of missiles, not at the warships, but at one of Tartarus's barren, lifeless moons. Xyloc laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A gesture of impotent rage. "They are firing at rocks." "Are they?" Kalen's voice was dangerously quiet. The missiles struck the moon. They were not high-explosive warheads. The impacts were small, almost insignificant. But a moment later, a cascade of secondary explosions blossomed across the moon's surface. "Those weren't missiles," Alan, the Glypton cadet, stated, its crystalline form vibrating as it processed the data. "Those were kinetic impact drills armed with seismic charges. They targeted geologically unstable fault lines." The holographic display, the moon began to fracture. Great canyons of fire split its surface. Then, with a terrible, silent majesty, it broke apart. Billions of tons of rock, propelled by the moon's own stored rotational energy and the precisely targeted explosions, were flung into new orbits. Orbits that intersected directly with the paths of Xyloc's advancing destroyers. The classroom gasped. The Cathar destroyers, built for speed and combat, were suddenly flying through a dense, high-velocity minefield of continent-sized boulders and mountains of shrapnel. Their point defense systems flared wildly, vaporizing smaller chunks, but they were overwhelmed. The first destroyer, Talon 1, was struck by a piece of debris the size of a small city. Its powerful shields flared, held for a nanosecond, and then collapsed. The impact didn't create a flashy explosion. The ship just vanished, atomized by the kinetic force. Talon 2 and 3 swerved desperately, their engines glowing white-hot, but the field was too dense. A storm of smaller impacts shredded their hulls, and they tumbled out of control, crippled and bleeding atmosphere. In the space of 90 seconds, Half of Xylok's destroyer screen had been eliminated without the humans firing a single direct shot at them. Xylok stared, his mandibles hanging slightly open. His brain, accustomed to the elegant calculus of fleet engagements, struggled to process what had happened. The humans had used the system's own geography as a weapon. They hadn't fought his ships. They had fought the space his ships occupied. The objective was never to fight your fleet in open space, Kalen explained, his tone still that of a patient teacher. That would be suicidal. The objective was to reshape the battlespace to our advantage. We call it environmental warfare. Why build 1,000 mines when a moon will do? The arrogance had completely drained from Xylok. His posture was no longer proud and erect. He was slumped over his console, the light from his multifaceted eyes flickering with disbelief and a dawning horror. He had lost 3 of his best ships and their veteran crews without even scratching the paint on an enemy vessel. "This," he stammered, his translator struggling to keep up with his agitated clicks. "This is unorthodox," Kalen corrected gently. "To us it is standard procedure. Phase 1 was intelligence gathering. Phase 2 was environmental shaping. Now, as your fleet is in disarray, Phase 3 begins." The main display, the human carrier, Vigilance, finally moved. It didn't advance. It turned, presenting its ventral side to the Cathar system. Massive bay doors opened, not releasing fighters but something else. Thousands of tiny objects, too small to be ships, were ejected, forming a glittering cloud. "What now?" Grull, the Vorlag, rumbled from his seat. "More probes?" "No," Kalen said. "Self-replicating drone swarms, we call them gremlins. They are not weapons, not directly. They are saboteurs." The cloud of gremlins accelerated, powered by tiny, efficient ion drives. They ignored the remaining Cathar ships. Their target was the planet. The Cathar garrison, watching the disaster unfold in orbit, was helpless as the cloud descended into the atmosphere. They were too small for point defense cannons, too numerous for fighters to intercept. They swarmed over the colony, a silent, glittering plague. They didn't explode. They landed and went to work. Kalen provided a calm, running commentary as the simulation zoomed in on the Cathar planetary base. Each gremlin has a simple, threefold directive. 1. Consume local materials, rock, metal, biomass to replicate. 2. Locate and infiltrate enemy technology. 3. Execute their payload directive. The screen, a Cathar tank, shuddered and its engine died. A communications tower went silent. A barracks life support system began venting oxygen into the atmosphere. The gremlins were disassembling the Cathar war machine from the inside out, molecule by molecule. They were eating the wiring, corrupting the software, turning advanced technology into inert metal. Xylok watched in abject horror. His 100,000-strong warrior garrison, the pride of the Imperium, was being rendered impotent not by an invading army, but by a cloud of microscopic robots. His warriors, armed with plasma rifles and honor, could do nothing. They couldn't even see their enemy. "This isn't war," Xylok finally roared, slamming one of his fists on the console. The impact cracked the holographic surface. "This is infestation. There is no honor. No glory. Glory is for the victory parade," Kalen said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Honor is a concept. Survival is a biological imperative. The human force has now neutralized your orbital superiority and your ground-based technological infrastructure. Their losses, 18 probes and a handful of seismic charges. Your losses, 3 destroyers with full crews and the operational capacity of your entire planetary garrison. The ground invasion can now begin. 5,000 human soldiers against your 100,000. Except your soldiers have no communications, no vehicles, no air support, and in approximately 2 hours, no functioning life support in their sealed habitats. The odds have shifted. The simulation showed the human transport ships, unescorted, beginning their slow descent toward the planet. The invasion wouldn't be a battle. It would be a cleanup operation. The classroom was utterly silent. The sheer, brutal efficiency of the human strategy was terrifying. They hadn't just defeated the Cathar. They had dismantled them, treated them not as a worthy opponent, but as a complex system to be logically deconstructed. Lyra, the Cygnian, was trembling, her feathers ruffled. The psychic noise of the simulated Cathar's panic and despair, even though fictional, was bleeding through the simulation's filters. She was feeling a pale echo of 100,000 warriors realizing their world had been taken from them before the first shot was fired. Xyloc was breathing heavily, his thorax heaving. "End the simulation," he whispered. "I concede the scenario." Kalen looked at him, and for the first time there was something other than placid calm in his eyes. It wasn't anger or triumph, it was something colder. "Disappointment. You gave your word, cadet," Kalen said softly. "You swore you would see it through to the end, and this is not the end. This was merely a skirmish. You challenged me to prove humanity's reputation. What you have just witnessed is how we handle a border dispute." His gaze swept the room, holding the terrified attention of every cadet. "Now, I will show you what happens when we perceive an existential threat." Kalen's fingers moved on his own hidden console. "Computer, escalate simulation. Objective, complete strategic denial. Target, the Cathar Imperium, all of it." The holographic display pulled back from the Tartarus system with breathtaking speed. The single star became one of a cluster, then one of millions in a galactic arm. The Cathar Imperium was highlighted, a swath of space encompassing over 200 star systems, a vibrant, ancient civilization. Their homeworld, Cathar Prime, a jewel of a world, pulsed at its center. "Existential threat," Xyloc choked out. "We were defending a colony. In the simulation, your initial posture was total, overwhelming force. Your stated goal was to shatter our will," Kalen explained, his voice a clinical monotone. "Human strategic doctrine, refined over millennia of fighting not other nations but our own reflection, has a simple axiom. Any power that seeks to shatter our will to exist must have their own capacity to exist permanently and irrevocably removed. It is not a matter of revenge. It is a matter of galactic ecological stability. A predator that grows too bold must be culled from the herd, for the health of the herd." The simulation re-engaged. This time there were no carriers or frigates. From the dark, unmapped spaces between galactic arms, new objects appeared. They weren't ships. They were relativistic kill vehicles, simple tungsten rods accelerated to 0.99 of the speed of light. They were launched from centuries ago, from automated platforms hidden in the void, aimed at targets that were only just beginning to be colonized when they were fired. Humanity hadn't just been planning for this war. They had been planning for it before the Cathar even knew they existed. The first RKV hit the primary naval shipyard of the Cathar Imperium. There was no explosion, just a silent, incandescent flash of pure energy that vaporized the entire station, and the 3 battlecruisers docked there. Then another hit a fleet command center. Another hit a choke point star system's primary gas refueling station. In the span of 5 minutes of simulated time, the entire Cathar military infrastructure was decapitated and crippled, targeted by weapons that had been traveling through space since before Xyloc's great-grandsire had hatched. The Cathar fleets, now leaderless and scattered, tried to mount a defense. But the human strategy shifted again. Swarms of gremlins, far more advanced than the ones used at Tartarus, were unleashed. They didn't just sabotage, they carried tailored data plagues. They infected the Cathar networks, not to destroy them, but to feed them false intelligence. Fleets were sent to defend systems that weren't under attack, while their own home systems were left vulnerable. Reinforcements were dispatched to ghost fleets that didn't exist. The Cathar Imperium's own formidable military machine was turned against itself, chasing shadows while the real daggers went for the heart. Then the attack on Cathar Prime began. Xyloc watched, his body rigid, his mind numb. He was watching the end of his world. But there were no grand fleets in orbit, no honorable bombardments. Instead, a single, small, unassuming human ship translated into high orbit. It did nothing. It just sat there. "What is it doing?" Lyra whispered, her voice thin with psychic dread. "It is the sower," Kalen said. The ship deployed a single probe which descended into the upper atmosphere of Cathar Prime. The probe aerosolized its payload, a cloud of custom-engineered nanites. The nanites were designed to do one thing. They were programmed to identify and deconstruct the unique triple helix DNA of the Cathar. The simulation zoomed in, showing a city square on Cathar Prime. It was beautiful, a blend of organic architecture and soaring crystal spires. Xyloc saw his people, Warriors, merchants, children chasing each other on iridescent wings. Then the nanites arrived, silent and invisible, carried on the wind. A Cathar warrior, clad in ceremonial armor, stumbled. He looked at his four-fingered hand and watched in confusion as the brilliant obsidian chitin turned to a dull, gray dust. Then his whole body dissolved, collapsing into a pile of constituent elements, carbon, calcium, and trace minerals. There was no pain, no scream, just a quiet, horrifying dissolution. One by one, then in dozens, then in thousands, the Cathar of Cathar Prime ceased to exist. Their cities, their art, their bodies, all unmade at a molecular level. The nanites were ruthlessly efficient, a gray plague that left buildings and plants untouched, but erased every trace of the Cathar themselves. Within a simulated week, the entire population of the homeworld, 12 billion souls, was gone. The planet was left pristine, habitable, and utterly empty of its native intelligence. Xyloc made a sound, a low, guttural keen of ultimate loss that his translator couldn't process. It was the sound of a soul breaking. He had collapsed in his seat, his powerful limbs trembling uncontrollably. His brilliant carapace seemed to have lost its luster, turning a sickly, muted color. "Stop," he begged, the word a shattered wreck. "Please stop." "It is not over," Kalen said, his voice a chillingly soft counterpoint to the silent devastation on the screen. "Killing a species is crude. Any brute with a big enough gun can do that. True strategic denial is about removing them from the timeline itself." The simulation expanded again. It showed the far-flung Cathar colonies, worlds settled centuries ago. Lightspeed human vessels arrived, not with weapons, but with archivists. These were AI constructs designed to infiltrate every data storage system, from central government servers to personal memory crystals. They didn't delete the Cathar's history. They rewrote it. The simulation showed a historian on a neutral world, decades later, accessing the galactic archives. He looked up the Cathar. The entry was now a single paragraph, describing them as a minor, non-sapient avian species that had died out due to a mysterious plague. Their great works of literature were now attributed to other species. Their technological breakthroughs were now footnotes in the patents of human corporations. Their star charts were subtly altered, their names erased from the heavens. They were being systematically edited out of reality. Their legacy, Alan the Glypton, vibrated. "You are destroying their legacy." "A legacy is a claim on the future," Kalen stated. "We are revoking the claim." Then came the final act, the one that broke something in the soul of everyone watching. The simulation showed a deep space seed vault, a genetic ark containing the cryopreserved genomes of every known Cathar clan, a final bulwark against extinction. A human science vessel, not a warship, approached it. It carefully breached the hull, neutralized the automated defenses with surgical precision, and downloaded the entire genetic archive. Xyloc looked up, a flicker of insane hope in his multifaceted eyes. You are preserving us." Kalen looked directly at Xyloc. For the first time, the cadet saw the full, bottomless depth of the abyss behind the man's placid face. It wasn't malice as Xyloc understood it, a hot, passionate thing. It was a cold, deliberate, philosophical malice, as calm and unyielding as a glacier. "Preserving, yes," Kalen said. "Your species possesses several interesting biological traits. Rapid cellular regeneration, efficient protein synthesis, useful genetic code." The simulation showed a human xenobiologist in a lab manipulating the Cathar genetic code on a holographic screen. He was snipping away the genes responsible for higher brain function, for sapience, for culture. He was enhancing the strength of their wings, the durability of their chitin. "Your species will not go extinct," Kalen said, as the simulation showed the final result. A creature that looked like a Cathar, but smaller, with the dull, instinct-driven eyes of an animal. It was being tagged and released into a newly terraformed world as a non-sapient predator, to be studied for its potential as a biological resource. "You will simply be retired, downgraded. Your history is erased, your people are dust, your planets are empty, and your genetic legacy now belongs to us, to be repurposed as we see fit. The Cathar Imperium is no longer a threat. It is no longer a memory. It is a raw material. The simulation is complete." The holographic emitter powered down. The image of the repurposed Cathar creature faded, leaving an aching void in the center of the room, silence. It was a silence more profound than the vacuum of space visible through the window. It was a dead, heavy, suffocating thing. The hum of the life support seemed obscenely loud. The vibrant colors of the nebula outside seemed like a mockery. Every eye was on Kalen. But he was no longer looking at the class. He was looking at Xyloc. The Cathar cadet was perfectly still. The tremors had stopped. He sat upright, but his posture was hollow, a fragile shell. He slowly, deliberately raised his head and looked at his instructor. He wasn't looking at a teacher anymore. He was looking at a monster far more terrible than any creature from the darkest legends of his people. The other cadets were frozen in their own private hells. Grull, the mighty Vorlag predator, had shrunk in his seat. His fur bristled not with aggression, but with primal fear. He understood predators, but this was something else. This was a gardener pulling a weed. Lyra the Cygnian had her head in her hands, her whole body shaking with a silent, psychic scream. She had felt the echo of a species being unwritten, and the feeling would haunt her forever. Alan the Glypton was motionless, its logical processes overloaded by an act of such total, rational annihilation that it defied all sane calculus. But it was Xyloc who finally understood. He looked into Kalen's calm, brown eyes, and the final, most terrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't the relativistic kill vehicles. It wasn't the nanite plague or the rewriting of history. It wasn't even the ultimate horror of having his species turned into cattle. The most terrifying thing in the galaxy was the look in Kalen's eyes. Throughout the entire simulation, from the first clever feint with the probes to the final, damnable act of genetic desecration, Kalen's expression had not changed. There was no anger, no hatred, no sadistic glee, no triumphalism. There was only a serene, detached professionalism, the look of a craftsman calmly and efficiently performing a difficult but necessary task. He had just depicted the absolute, total, an eternal eradication of an entire civilization of billions, their past, present, and future, and he looked as if he had just finished explaining a moderately complex mathematical equation. And in that moment, Xyloc understood humanity's reputation. It wasn't about their death-world origins or their persistence hunting. It was this terrible, calm, patient capacity for utter finality. The ability to commit an act of unimaginable horror not out of passion, but out of simple, pragmatic logic. To look upon another great civilization and see not a rival, but a potential error in a system that needed to be corrected permanently. The whispers weren't exaggerated. They were understated. They were hopelessly, terrifyingly inadequate. "Why?" Xyloc finally whispered, the sound barely audible in the crushing silence. His voice was no longer the resonant declaration of a proud warrior, but the broken rasp of a ghost. Kalen's gaze remained locked on his. The placid mask was still there, but Xyloc could now see the terrible truth that it hid. Not a void of emotion, but an ocean of it, walled off and channeled into a single, unswerving purpose. "Because you asked," the human instructor said, his voice still impossibly, horribly calm. "And because one day, someone might ask for real, and my species has decided long ago that we will only ever have to answer that question once." He straightened his simple gray uniform and looked out at the silent, traumatized class. "This concludes today's lesson. Class dismissed."